the Hells Angels biker saw the little girl lift a corroded canister, and the code within threatened a forgotten bloodline. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. A story of an unexpected discovery, an innocent child, and the secret that could change everything. It all began on a quiet, misty afternoon in the small town of Cedar Ridge. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the streets were nearly empty, as if everyone had decided to stay inside. The silence was broken by the hum of a motorcycle engine, its sound cutting through the cool air. The rider, a seasoned Hells Angels biker named Jake Morrison, was cruising down a narrow road that led out of town. His leather jacket creaked as he shifted gears, the rumble of his Harley-Davidson soothing his restless mind. Jake had always found peace on the open road, away from the noise of the city and the demands of his past life. As he made his way through the dense forest, he noticed something strange on the side of the road. A small figure, barely visible among the trees. It was a young girl, no older than 7 or 8, crouched by the edge of a dirt path. Jake's first instinct was to keep going. It wasn't his problem. But then, he noticed something that stopped him cold. The girl was holding a rusted canister in her hands, its surface covered in years of corrosion and dirt. There was something unsettling about it, something that didn't belong there. His curiosity piqued. Jake slowed down and pulled to the side of the road. He killed the engine and dismounted, his boots crunching on the gravel as he approached the girl. She looked up at him with wide, terrified eyes, clutching the canister tightly to her chest. "What are you doing here, kid?" Jake's voice was rough, but not unkind. The girl didn't respond right away. She just stared at him, her lips trembling. Jake took a step closer, his instinct to protect kicking in. "Hey, it's all right. I'm not gonna hurt you," he said, trying to reassure her. The girl's eyes flickered to the canister in her hands, and then back to him. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. Instead, she lifted the canister slightly, as if offering it to him. Jake hesitated for a moment before reaching out to take it. As soon as his fingers touched the metal, he felt a jolt of energy run through him. The canister was cold, unnaturally cold, as if it had been exposed to some sort of freezing temperature. Jake's mind raced, but before he could say anything, the girl whispered, "It's not just a canister. It's a key." Jake's heart skipped a beat. What could this little girl possibly know about something so mysterious? The canister was old, corroded, and yet it seemed to hum with an almost otherworldly power. Was she referring to some kind of hidden treasure? A secret locked away for years? Or was there something even more dangerous at play here? Before he could ask, the girl turned and ran, disappearing into the trees as quickly as she had appeared. Jake stood there, staring at the canister in his hand, the weight of the moment settling in. What had he just stumbled upon? And what did it have to do with this forgotten bloodline that the girl had mentioned? The answers were just beginning to unfold, but Jake knew one thing for sure. This was no ordinary discovery. The journey ahead would lead him down a path filled with danger, secrets, and truths better left buried. And it all started with that rusted canister, and the girl who had handed it to him. Jake stood in the middle of the quiet road, the weight of the canister still heavy in his hands. The sound of the little girl's feet crunching in the dirt faded as she disappeared into the woods. He knew he should have chased after her, but something kept him rooted to the spot. Something about that rusted canister, and the girl's cryptic words, gnawed at him. It was not just a canister, she had said. It was a key. A key to what? And why did it feel like it was calling out to him? He shook his head, and slipped the canister into the saddlebag of his Harley, hoping that somehow this was just his imagination running wild. He started the engine and took off, the wind whipping against his face. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being drawn towards something he wasn't prepared for. After hours of driving, the familiar roads began to fade as Jake ventured deeper into the forest. He'd left Cedar Ridge behind and had no clear destination in mind, but something in his gut told him he needed to keep moving. The world around him felt still, like the calm before a storm. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the dense trees gave way to an old, decrepit building. It looked like an abandoned warehouse or maybe a storage facility, its walls rusted and its windows boarded up. It stood like a forgotten monument to time, standing alone in the shadow of the thick woods. Jake pulled up in front of the building and killed the engine. He had no idea why he was drawn to this place, but his instincts told him it was important. The building was silent, but something about it felt alive, as though it had a pulse of its own. He dismounted and approached the entrance. The heavy wooden door creaked as he pushed it open, revealing a dark, musty interior. The smell of old wood and dust filled the air. Inside, the space was cluttered with abandoned furniture, rusted tools, and broken machinery. But there was something odd about the way the items were arranged. It was as if someone had carefully placed them, as though they were meant to be found at a specific moment. Jake's eyes narrowed as he scanned the room. In the far corner, a desk sat with piles of yellowed papers scattered across it. The papers looked old, older than anything Jake had ever seen. They were covered in cryptic symbols and strange markings. At the desk, he saw an object he hadn't noticed at first, a large, leather-bound book. It was sitting on top of the papers, as though it were waiting for him. He reached for it cautiously and opened the cover. The pages were filled with more symbols, much like the ones on the papers, but there was one thing that stood out. A drawing of the very canister he had in his possession. It was drawn with incredible detail, and beneath the image was a set of instructions written in a language Jake couldn't understand. The text seemed to hum with a mysterious energy, as though it were trying to communicate with him, but the words were foreign, impossible to decipher. He flipped through the book, his heart pounding with every turn of the page. The deeper he went, the more he found references to a bloodline, an ancient family connected to the symbols, to the canister, and to a treasure that had been lost for centuries. The more Jake read, the more he realized that this wasn't just about a hidden fortune. This was about something far more dangerous. The canister was part of a puzzle, and the puzzle was connected to a secret society that had been operating in the shadows for generations. They had guarded this secret for as long as anyone could remember, and now it seemed that Jake had stumbled upon the key to unlocking it all. The question was, who else knew about this? And why had the little girl been carrying the canister? Jake closed the book and stood up, his mind racing. As he moved toward the door, a sound stopped him dead in his tracks. The door behind him slammed shut with a force that rattled the entire building. Jake spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for the knife he kept in his jacket. But there was no one there. No footsteps, no voices, just the eerie silence of the abandoned warehouse. He could feel the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Something wasn't right. The room seemed to close in on him. He wasn't alone, and the question lingered in his mind. Had he been followed? Or was someone already inside, watching him, waiting for him to make a move? He didn't have time to figure it out. He needed to get out. Fast. He turned back to the desk, grabbed the book, and shoved it into his bag. The canister was still in the saddlebag of his bike. It was time to leave. But as he made his way to the exit, he heard a whisper, soft and low, just behind him. It's too late. Jake spun around, heart racing, but again, there was no one there. The whisper seemed to echo in his mind, growing louder, more insistent. He wasn't just being hunted. He was being pulled into something much bigger, something he wasn't prepared for. With a final glance around the room, Jake grabbed the canister from his saddlebag and ran out into the night. The wind howled through the trees as he started the Harley and sped off into the darkness. Whatever he had discovered here, whatever had been set into motion, it was too late to turn back now. Jake sped down the winding road, his Harley's engine growling beneath him. But even the deafening roar of the bike couldn't drown out the nagging feeling in his chest. The night had grown colder, and the weight of the book and the canister in his saddlebag felt heavier with every mile. He kept glancing over his shoulder, as if expecting someone to be tailing him, but the roads were empty, the only company the shadows cast by the moonlight. His mind kept returning to the cryptic message he had heard in the warehouse. It's too late. What did it mean? Who had said it? The words echoed in his mind, like a warning, like a promise. As he approached a small, sleepy town on the edge of the forest, he decided to stop and rest for the night. He needed to clear his head. The weight of what he had uncovered, the book, the canister, the bloodline, was starting to press down on him. He pulled into a small diner at the corner of the main street. The neon sign flickered weakly, casting an eerie glow on the cracked pavement. It was almost empty inside, save for a lone waitress behind the counter and a few patrons scattered across the booths. Jake walked in, his boots heavy on the floor, and took a seat by the window. He kept the book in his bag, but the canister rested on the table in front of him, its dull surface reflecting the dim light. The waitress, a young woman in her 30s with tired eyes, approached and gave him a hesitant smile. "What can I get you, hon?" she asked, her voice quiet, almost like she had heard too many stories in this town. "Coffee. Black," Jake said, his voice rough, his mind still racing. She nodded and walked away, casting a glance at the canister as she left. Jake stared at it, the symbols on its surface now seeming to pulse, as though it were alive. He shook his head. It was just the exhaustion playing tricks on him. But as he sat there, waiting for the coffee, he couldn't ignore the feeling that he was being watched. He looked up. A man had entered the diner, tall, with a weathered face that looked like it had seen its fair share of trouble. He was wearing a long coat, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses, even though it was nearly midnight. He didn't look like anyone from the town. The man's gaze met Jake's for a brief moment before he moved to the counter and sat a few stools away. Jake tensed, instinctively reaching for the canister, his fingers brushing its surface. The man at the counter ordered a drink, but Jake didn't hear what it was. His attention was locked on the stranger. Something about him felt off. The man's eyes flicked toward Jake again, and Jake could swear he saw something flicker in them. Recognition? Jake's pulse quickened. He needed to leave, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go down. Just then, the waitress returned with his coffee. As she set the cup down, she gave him a nervous smile, but her eyes darted to the stranger at the counter. "You're not from around here, are you?" she asked, almost too casually. Jake's eyes narrowed. "Just passing through," he replied, his voice low. The waitress gave him a tight-lipped smile before quickly turning away. The man at the counter stood up and walked toward the door, but just as he passed Jake's table, he stopped. The stranger's voice was low and smooth, like it was made for secrets. "You should be careful," he said, his eyes never leaving Jake's. "Not everyone around here is as friendly as they seem." Jake stared at him, his hand tightening around the edge of the canister. Before he could respond, the man turned and walked out the door, disappearing into the night. Jake sat frozen for a moment, his mind reeling. Who was that guy? And what did he know about the canister? The unease settled deeper in his stomach. He had to find out more about what he had stumbled into. What was this bloodline? What was the canister really holding? He couldn't shake the feeling that the answers were closer than he realized, but danger was too. Jake paid for his coffee and stood, tossing a few bills onto the table. As he walked out the door, the wind hit him like a cold slap, but it did nothing to clear his thoughts. The man's warning echoed in his mind, growing louder with each step. He needed to get to the bottom of this. He needed to find out who else was after the canister, and why. Without another thought, Jake swung his leg over the Harley and started the engine. The road ahead seemed endless, but he knew there was no turning back now. Whatever this was, whatever had been set into motion by the canister, he was already too deep in. The world around him felt like it was closing in, and yet, the only way forward was through. As he rode into the night, the shadows seemed to follow him, and for the first time in a long while, Jake wasn't sure he could outrun them. Jake's hands tightened on the handlebars as the Harley roared through the empty highway. The wind whipped his face, but it did little to clear the storm in his mind. The stranger in the diner kept haunting him, his warning about the dangers of Cedar Ridge ringing in his ears. Jake had thought that getting away from the club and leaving behind his violent past would bring peace, but instead, he felt like he had fallen into something much bigger, a tangled web of secrets and mysteries he wasn't prepared for. As the road stretched before him, he thought about the canister, the book, the bloodline. What was it all leading to? What was the connection between this ancient family and the cryptic symbols? What was the purpose of the canister? And why had that little girl given it to him? He needed answers, and he needed them fast. The feeling of being watched hadn't gone away. If anything, it had grown stronger the farther he rode. It was like someone, or something, was always just a step behind. The road ahead took a sharp turn, leading Jake down a darkened trail that seemed to swallow him whole. The trees lined the path like silent sentinels, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, blocking the moonlight. Jake's headlights barely cut through the thick darkness, but he pushed forward, unable to stop. The unease gnawed at him, and he had the distinct feeling that the more he ran, the closer he was getting to whatever it was that had been set in motion the moment he picked up the canister. He wasn't sure where he was going, but he knew he had to keep moving. Eventually, the road opened up to a clearing, and in the middle of it stood a massive stone building. It was old, older than anything Jake had ever seen. The structure had a strange, almost otherworldly presence, like it had been waiting for him. The walls were covered in moss, and the windows were cracked, giving the whole place an abandoned, haunted look. Jake slowed the bike and pulled up to the entrance. His heart was pounding, and his senses were on high alert. The place felt like it was alive, as though it had a purpose far beyond anything he could understand. He dismounted and approached cautiously. The heavy door creaked as he pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit hallway. The air inside was thick with the smell of damp stone, and the walls were lined with faded tapestries and strange markings that seemed to shimmer in the low light. As Jake ventured deeper into the building, he felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He wasn't alone. There were sounds, soft, shuffling footsteps echoing in the distance. He wasn't sure if it was just his imagination, but it felt real, like someone, or something, was tracking his every move. The deeper he went, the more the feeling of being watched grew. Jake's breath quickened, but he didn't stop. He was too close now to turn back. He reached a grand chamber at the heart of the building, and his eyes widened as he took in the sight before him. In the center of the room was a massive stone pedestal, on top of which lay a stone chest, covered in intricate symbols. Jake felt a strange pull, like an invisible force was urging him to open it. He stepped forward, but as his hand neared the chest, a low, guttural voice echoed through the chamber. "You shouldn't have come here." Jake froze, his heart racing. He spun around, but there was no one there. The voice had come from nowhere and everywhere at once, like it had been carved into the very stone. He took a step back, his instincts screaming at him to leave, but the canister in his saddlebag felt heavier, like it was pushing him toward the chest. The symbols on the chest were identical to the ones on the canister, the ones in the book. It was the same language. It was a key. He had no choice. He had to open it. With shaking hands, Jake pulled the lid open. Inside, there was a set of ancient scrolls, their edges frayed with age. He reached for them carefully, feeling the weight of history in his hands. As soon as he touched the scrolls, the air in the room seemed to shift. The walls groaned as if they were awakening, and the temperature dropped, sending a chill down his spine. Then, the voice spoke again, this time louder and more urgent. The bloodline must remain hidden. Jake's pulse hammered in his ears as he tried to make sense of the warning. What bloodline? Why was this secret so important? Before he could react, a sharp noise broke the tension, a distant thud, like something heavy falling to the ground. Jake turned, his heart pounding in his chest, but there was nothing in the chamber but shadows. The voice was gone. The room had fallen silent. Jake's instincts told him that whatever was hidden in this place, whatever secrets it held, was far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The weight of the canister and the scrolls felt overwhelming now, like they were tying him to something he couldn't escape. He didn't know if it was the right choice, but he shoved the scrolls into his bag and grabbed the canister. He needed to leave, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't the only one who knew he had just uncovered something big. Whatever had been set into motion when he took the canister wasn't over. It was just beginning. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he stumbled back toward the door of the chamber. The eerie voice was gone, but the weight of its words lingered in the air. The chest, the canister, the scrolls, all of it seemed to be pulling him deeper into something dark, something beyond his control. He hadn't asked for this. He hadn't asked for the secrets, the danger, or the shadows that now seemed to haunt his every step. But there was no turning back now. Not with the canister and the scrolls in his possession. The air inside the stone building was thick, like the very walls were closing in on him. Jake glanced around, his eyes scanning the dimly lit room, half expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. But there was no one, just the flickering light of his flashlight bouncing off the ancient stone and the sound of his own breath echoing in the silence. He needed to get out. Fast. With quick, calculated steps, he moved toward the door. He kept his eyes on the canister, now hidden in his bag, feeling the weight of it with every step. It was a constant reminder of the mess he'd found himself in. the mess he couldn't escape. He pushed the door open and stepped into the cold night air. The wind bit at his skin, but it did nothing to clear the fog in his mind. He had to get away. But where? What was he supposed to do with all of this? The secrets, the warnings, the bloodline. He couldn't just let it go. He couldn't walk away. His motorcycle was parked just outside, the Harley's engine still humming with power. As he approached it, he noticed something out of the corner of his eye, a shadow moving in the trees just beyond the clearing. Jake froze. His hand instinctively moved toward the knife tucked into his jacket, his pulse racing. The shadow darted between the trees, but before Jake could react, a voice called out from the darkness. "You're not going anywhere." The voice was low, harsh, and it sent a chill down Jake's spine. He turned, his eyes searching the darkness for the source of the voice. "Who are you?" Jake's voice was steady, though his heart was racing. The figure stepped forward, emerging from the shadows. It was the same man from the diner, the one who had warned him. Jake's instincts told him to run, but his feet stayed rooted to the ground. The man wasn't alone. Behind him, a group of others appeared, their faces hidden in the darkness, their eyes glowing faintly. Jake's hand tightened around the knife as the man approached. "We've been looking for you," the man said, his voice laced with menace. "And now that you've found the key, you're not getting away." Jake's grip tightened. "What do you want with me?" The man's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't friendly. "It's not you we're after, Jake. It's what you're holding. That canister and those scrolls, they belong to us." Jake's mind raced. The man's words didn't make sense. What did he mean, belong to us? Who was us? And why had they been watching him? He had to think fast. He couldn't let these people take what he had. He couldn't let them get their hands on the canister. "I don't know who you are," Jake said, his voice low, "but you're not getting this." He pulled the canister from his bag, holding it up in the moonlight, the rusted metal gleaming in the dark. The man's eyes narrowed. "You don't understand what you're holding, do you?" he sneered. "That canister is not just some trinket. It's the key to unlocking a power you can't even begin to comprehend." Jake's pulse quickened as he stared at the man, trying to make sense of his words. "Power," Jake said, his voice laced with skepticism. "You're telling me this canister is some kind of key to power?" The man laughed, but it wasn't a sound of amusement. It was cold, calculating. "You have no idea. The bloodline you've stumbled upon. It's not just about wealth or treasure. It's about control. And whoever controls that canister controls everything." Jake's stomach tightened. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice growing more urgent. "And what do you want with this?" The man's expression darkened. "We want to make sure it stays where it belongs, out of the wrong hands. And as for who we are, let's just say we've been waiting for someone like you to show up." Jake's mind raced. He wasn't sure what the man meant, but it was clear now that whatever the canister was, it wasn't just some relic. It was something much more dangerous, and he had walked right into it. The man stepped forward, his hand outstretched. "Give it to me," he said, his tone not a request, but an order. Jake's hand tightened around the canister. He wasn't about to hand it over. Not to this man, not to anyone. "No," Jake said, his voice sharp. "I don't think so." Before the man could respond, Jake turned and bolted toward his bike. His heart hammered in his chest as he jumped onto the Harley, kicked it into gear, and sped off into the night. He didn't look back, but he could feel their eyes on him, the feeling of being hunted pressing down on him. Whatever had just happened, whatever these people were after, it was only just beginning. And he was now in the middle of it all. Jake's heart raced as the engine of his Harley roared beneath him, the wind howling in his ears. He glanced over his shoulder, his eyes scanning the darkness behind him, but there was nothing, no headlights, no shadows creeping up on him. It didn't matter. He could still feel them. He could feel the weight of their presence, the people who had been watching him, following him, waiting for the right moment to strike. He didn't know who they were, but he knew one thing. They wanted the canister, and they weren't going to stop until they got it. He pushed the throttle harder, urging the bike to go faster, but the road stretched ahead of him like an endless tunnel, and the farther he rode, the heavier the weight of the mystery grew. The canister in his saddlebag felt like a ticking bomb, its secrets pulling him deeper into a web he couldn't escape. The scrolls, the symbols, the warnings, it was all starting to make sense, but the more he uncovered, the more he realized how little he truly understood. The road ahead twisted and turned, leading him through the forest, and Jake found himself heading toward the mountains. The shadows of the trees blurred in the corner of his vision, but he didn't slow down. He couldn't. There was nowhere to hide. As the night deepened, Jake finally saw the lights of a small town in the distance. It wasn't much, a few houses, a gas station, and a diner, but it was a place to rest, a place to regroup. He pulled into the gas station, the tires of his bike skidding slightly on the gravel as he came to a stop. The gas station was empty except for a man filling up his truck. Jake kept his head low, not wanting to draw attention. He didn't need to make a scene. He just needed answers. The clerk behind the counter didn't pay him any mind as Jake grabbed a coffee and sat down at a small table in the corner. He didn't feel safe here, but he didn't feel safe anywhere. As he sipped the coffee, his mind raced. The man in the diner, the one who had warned him. What did he mean by saying, "It's not you we're after, Jake"? And the bloodline? What was it all connected to? Why had they been watching him? Jake knew that the answers were out there, but he didn't know where to look. His eyes fell on the canister in his bag, and a chill ran down his spine. This thing, it wasn't just some random object. It was a key, like the girl had said. But a key to what? A key to a secret so powerful that people were willing to kill for it. A voice broke through his thoughts. "You're the one they've been looking for." Jake looked up, startled. The man from the diner was standing by the door, his eyes fixed on Jake with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. "Who are you?" Jake asked, his voice low but steady. "Who are you people?" The man smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "We're the ones who've been keeping the secrets you're trying to uncover. And now you've got the key. That canister, it belongs to us." Jake stood up, his hand instinctively reaching for the knife in his jacket. He wasn't sure who this man was, but one thing was clear. This wasn't a casual encounter. This was a confrontation. "I'm not giving it to you," Jake said, his voice hardening. "You can try to take it, but you won't get it without a fight." The man chuckled, a dark, humorless sound. "You don't understand, do you? This isn't about you, or the canister. It's about something much bigger. The bloodline, the power, it's all connected." Jake's mind was spinning. "What do you mean, the bloodline?" The man's eyes glinted with something like amusement. "The bloodline that started it all. The bloodline that's been hidden for centuries. The canister is the key to unlocking it. And now that you've found it, you've become part of the story. You're in deeper than you realize." Jake's head was swimming with questions. "Who are you working for?" he asked, his voice tight. "What do you want with the canister?" The man's smile faded, replaced by something darker. "We're not working for anyone. We're the ones who control the secrets. The canister is the key to unlocking an ancient power, and we're the only ones who can make sure it's used the right way." Jake's grip on the knife tightened. "And what if I don't believe you?" The man took a step forward, his face now only inches from Jake's. "Then you'll find out the hard way," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Jake's heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing. The canister wasn't just some random object. It was a key to something bigger than he had ever imagined. And these people, whoever they were determined to take it from him. He wasn't going to let them. Not without a fight. The man turned to leave, his footsteps echoing in the empty diner. "Think about it, Jake," he called over his shoulder. "You're not just running from us. You're running from something much bigger. The bloodline is waiting for you." Jake stood there, frozen, his hand still on the knife. The man had said too much, and yet so little. The bloodline, the power, the canister, it was all connected. And Jake had just become a part of it. He wasn't sure what was waiting for him, but one thing was certain. He couldn't walk away now. He had to find out the truth, and he had to do it before they found him first. Jake's grip tightened on the handlebars of his Harley as he sped down the winding road, the headlights cutting through the night. The man in the diner had left him with more questions than answers, and now, with the words "the bloodline is waiting for you" still echoing in his mind, he felt the weight of the mystery pressing on him. The canister was no longer just a strange artifact. It was the key to something much bigger, something darker. But what was that something? And why had they been watching him? Jake's mind raced, the engine of the bike roaring beneath him. But no matter how fast he went, he couldn't outrun the feeling that he was being drawn into something dangerous, something he couldn't escape. The road stretched on, empty and silent, but the weight of the canister in his saddlebag felt heavier with each passing mile. He needed answers, and the only place he could think of to find them was the old man's house. The man who had first warned him about the canister. Jake had heard rumors about him. No one knew. Much, but they said he had been around for a long time and knew more about the world than anyone. It was worth a shot. The town was small, and the roads were narrow as he pulled into a small, weathered driveway. The house looked abandoned, though a light flickered faintly from the second-floor window. Jake killed the engine and approached cautiously. He knocked on the door, his heart pounding as the sound echoed into the quiet night. The door creaked open, revealing an old man with a weathered face, his eyes sharp despite his age. "What do you want?" the man asked, his voice gruff. Jake's instincts told him this wasn't someone who would be easily fooled. "I need answers," Jake said, his voice low. "About the canister, about the bloodline. I've been followed, and I don't know who to trust." The man's eyes flickered to the road behind Jake, as though he could sense the danger lurking, even if it wasn't visible yet. He stepped aside, allowing Jake to enter. The house was dark, the only light coming from a small lamp on the table. The smell of dust and old books filled the air as Jake took a seat across from the man. "You're deeper into this than you think," the old man said, his voice more serious now. "The bloodline is a secret, one that's been hidden for centuries. And now that you've found it, there's no turning back. They'll come for you." Jake's pulse quickened. Who? Who will come for me?" The man leaned back in his chair, folding his hands together. "You've met them. The ones who want the canister. The ones who think they have the right to control the power inside it. But they're not the only ones after it. There are others. The ones who created the bloodline." Jake frowned. "What do you mean, created it?" The old man's eyes narrowed, as though weighing his words carefully. "The bloodline was meant to be a legacy, a power that could control the future. It was built on ancient knowledge, knowledge that was never meant to be unleashed. But there are forces out there, people who will do anything to unlock it." He paused, studying Jake closely. "And you, Jake, have unwittingly become a part of it." The weight of the man's words hit Jake like a freight train. He had thought he was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, but now it seemed like he had stumbled into something far bigger, far more dangerous than he could have imagined. He looked at the canister, sitting quietly in his bag. What had he gotten himself into? "So what now?" Jake asked, his voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. "Now," the man said slowly, "you have two choices. You can run and hide, try to escape from it all, or you can embrace your role in this and fight back. But be warned, the people who are after you won't stop. They'll track you down. And when they find you, they won't hesitate to do whatever it takes to get that canister back." Jake stood up, his mind racing. He had never been the kind of man to run from a fight, but this wasn't just any fight. This was about more than just survival. It was about control, about power. And if he was going to survive, he would need to learn everything he could about the bloodline and the secrets it held. "I'm not running," Jake said, his voice low and determined. "I'll fight, but I need to know everything you know. I need to know what I'm up against." The old man nodded, as though he had expected this answer. "I'll tell you what I know," he said. "But you're going to need more than just information. You're going to need allies, people you can trust, and you're going to have to make some hard choices along the way." Jake's eyes hardened. He was ready. Whatever this was, whatever danger awaited him, he wasn't backing down. He was going to uncover the truth, and he was going to make sure no one took that canister from him. The man stood, moving toward a shelf filled with old books and dusty artifacts. He pulled down a thick leather-bound tome and handed it to Jake. "This," the man said, "will give you the answers you need. But be careful. Knowledge like this comes with a price, and you're going to have to decide if it's one you're willing to pay." Jake took the book, feeling the weight of it in his hands. The answers were inside, but so was the danger. And Jake was ready to face it all. Jake's fingers gripped the worn leather cover of the book as he stared at the old man, the weight of the ancient pages pressing down on him. The room felt even darker now, the shadows creeping closer with every passing second. He didn't know what to expect, but he had to know the truth. Whatever these people were after, whatever this bloodline was about, Jake was now tied to it. The old man's eyes never left Jake's as he slowly sat back down, his expression unreadable. "You'll need to understand the full history if you want to survive this," the man said, his voice low but steady. Jake nodded, opening the book to the first page. It was written in the same strange symbols that had been on the canister, symbols he could barely recognize. But something about them felt familiar, as though his mind was starting to make connections. As he flipped through the pages, the weight of the history contained within them sank in. The bloodline was older than anything Jake could have imagined. It went back centuries, through families that had secretly guarded a power that had shaped the course of history. But the power wasn't just about control over wealth or influence. It was about something far more dangerous. The book spoke of an ancient ritual, a key that had been passed down through generations. The canister was part of the ritual, and whoever controlled it could unlock something far beyond anything Jake could understand. He had become part of that ritual, a key player in something bigger than himself. "What's the ritual?" Jake asked, looking up from the book, his eyes searching the old man's face for answers. The old man sighed, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "The ritual is what binds the bloodline to the power. It's been guarded for centuries to ensure no one misuses it. But now, those who are after you, they want to break that safeguard. They believe they can control the power if they unlock the full ritual, and they won't stop until they do." Jake's heart raced as the pieces of the puzzle slowly started to fit together. It wasn't just about the canister or the scrolls. It was about control over a power that could change everything. And if these people had their way, they would stop at nothing to get it. The old man leaned forward, his voice dropping even lower. "You've already seen the consequences of what happens when this power falls into the wrong hands. It's why I've been keeping an eye on you. You've got the canister, but you're also the one they've been waiting for. The one who's supposed to unlock the power." Jake felt his stomach tighten. He hadn't asked for this. He hadn't asked to be dragged into this ancient struggle for power. "I don't want to be a part of this," Jake said, his voice strained. "I just want to live my life, not get caught up in some centuries-old war." The old man's eyes softened slightly, but there was a hardness in his gaze that told Jake this wasn't just some ordinary fight. "You don't get to choose, Jake. The moment you found that canister, you became a part of this. Now, the only choice you have is how you're going to play the game." Jake's hands tightened around the book. He had no choice but to keep moving forward. He couldn't just walk away, not now. He had to figure out how to stop them, how to protect the power from falling into the wrong hands. But first, he needed to know who was behind all of this. "Who are they?" Jake asked, his voice laced with urgency. The old man stared at him, his expression unreadable. "They're a shadow organization, one that has existed for centuries, operating in the background. They've infiltrated governments, businesses, and families. They're the ones who think they can control the bloodline, and they'll stop at nothing to do it. They're the ones who've been following you." Jake's mind reeled. This was bigger than he had imagined. It wasn't just some rogue group after the canister. It was a global conspiracy, a hidden force that had been shaping history for centuries. The old man stood up and walked over to a dusty shelf, pulling down an old map. He spread it out on the table in front of Jake. "This is where it all leads," he said, pointing to various locations on the map. "These places hold the key to unlocking the full power of the bloodline. And right now, you're standing at the center of it all." Jake stared at the map, his mind racing. He had no idea what he was getting into, but one thing was clear. He couldn't back down now. If these people were after the power, he needed to find a way to stop them before it was too late. The old man looked at him with a knowing gaze. "You'll have to move fast. They won't hesitate to take whatever they need to achieve their goal, and they'll do whatever it takes to get it." Jake nodded, determination settling over him. He wasn't going to let them win. He had a part to play in all of this, and he was going to make sure it wasn't the last part. He grabbed the canister and the book, shoving them into his bag, and stood up. "Where do I start?" he asked. The old man's gaze darkened. "You'll start by finding the other pieces, Jake. But be careful. You don't know who you can trust, and you don't know what they'll do to get to you." Jake turned and walked toward the door, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know what was ahead, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going down without a fight. Jake's mind raced as he left the old man's house, the weight of the information pressing heavily on his shoulders. The map, the bloodline, the canister, all of it was leading him into something far darker than he had ever imagined. He hadn't asked for any of this, yet somehow, he was now tangled in a conspiracy that stretched back centuries. With every step he took, the sense of danger only grew stronger. They were coming for him. He had felt it earlier, that sense of being watched, and it hadn't gone away. It was only a matter of time before they caught up with him. As Jake made his way back to his bike, he glanced around nervously, half expecting someone to jump out of the shadows. The night was quiet, too quiet. and the only sound was the distant hum of his Harley's engine as he revved it to life. The road ahead was dark, but it didn't matter. He had a new mission, a new goal, to find the other pieces of the puzzle. The man had told him to move fast, that the people who were after him wouldn't hesitate to do whatever it took to get the canister. He couldn't let that happen. He couldn't let these people control what had been hidden for centuries. As Jake sped down the road, his thoughts kept drifting back to the map. It was covered in strange markings and locations, each one a potential clue to the next step in the puzzle. But he didn't know where to start. The weight of the unknown was suffocating, and Jake hated that feeling. He had always been the one in control, the one who made the decisions, but now he was just following a trail laid out by others. It didn't sit right with him. But there was no turning back now. The first location on the map was a small town on the outskirts of the state. Jake had never been there, but he knew it was his best shot. The old man had mentioned the bloodline being connected to certain places, hidden within the fabric of everyday life. If Jake wanted answers, he had to follow the clues, no matter how dangerous it might be. The town was small, but the streets were lined with old buildings, some of which looked abandoned. Jake parked his bike in front of a small cafe, its neon sign flickering in the dark. He needed to blend in, to keep his head low. He walked into the cafe, the bell above the door ringing as he stepped inside. The place was mostly empty, save for a few people sitting at the counter. A waitress gave him a polite smile as he sat down at a table in the corner, his back to the wall. He kept his eyes on the door as he ordered a coffee, his senses alert. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but he knew that this town, this cafe, was somehow connected to everything. After a few minutes, a man walked in, his face partially hidden beneath the brim of a hat. He looked around the room, his eyes scanning the patrons as he moved toward Jake's table. Jake stiffened, his hand instinctively going to the knife tucked into his jacket. The man stopped in front of him, his voice low. "You're looking for answers," he said, his voice barely audible over the hum of the cafe. Jake's heart skipped a beat. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice calm, but the tension in his body was evident. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he sat down across from Jake, his gaze never leaving him. "I know what you're after," the man continued, his voice cold. "And I know why they're coming. For you." Jake's stomach churned. He had been warned about people like this, people who seemed to know everything, and yet nothing at all. But this man, sitting across from him, wasn't just anyone. "You're part of it," Jake said, his voice steady. "Aren't you?" The man nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "I was. A long time ago. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here to tell you something important. Something you need to hear if you want to survive." Jake leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "What do you know about the bloodline?" The man's eyes flickered with a hint of recognition. "More than you can imagine," he said softly. "The bloodline is not just a legacy. It's a key to a power so old, so dangerous, that if it's unlocked, it will change everything. And you, Jake, you've become a part of it, whether you want to be or not." Jake felt the weight of the words settle on him, heavier than anything he had experienced before. The bloodline wasn't just a family or a group. It was a force, a power, and now it was tied to him. "What do you want from me?" Jake asked, his voice low, his mind spinning. "I want you to understand what you're up against," the man said, leaning in slightly. "There are others, people who want to control this power. They've been waiting for someone like you, someone who would find the canister and unlock its secrets. But they won't stop there. They'll do anything to take it from you, to use it for their own gain." Jake's heart pounded in his chest. He wasn't ready for this, but he had no choice now. "And what am I supposed to do?" he asked, his voice sharp with frustration. The man stood up, his expression hardening. "You need to get to the next location," he said. "There's someone there who can help you. Someone who knows how to stop them. But you can't do it alone. Not anymore." The man turned to leave, but before he reached the door, he paused. "They're coming, Jake," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "And you're not ready. But you can be." With that, the man was gone, leaving Jake alone with his thoughts and the weight of the mission ahead. The road ahead was darker than he had ever imagined, but there was no turning back now. He had a part to play, and he was going to make sure it wasn't the last part. Jake sat in the dim light of the cafe, his mind reeling from the conversation with the man who had appeared out of nowhere. The words "they're coming" echoed in his mind like a constant drumbeat, an ever-present reminder of the danger closing in around him. He had known this would get worse, but hearing it from someone who had been part of it all made it real. The bloodline, the power, the canister. Jake had no idea how deep this rabbit hole went, but now he was too far down to turn back. He stood up, leaving a few dollars on the table, and walked out of the cafe, the cold night air hitting him like a slap. His Harley sat there, the headlights flickering faintly in the darkness. The next location on the map, the one the man had hinted at, was over 100 miles away. It felt like too much to take in all at once. But Jake had no choice. He had to get there, and fast. He swung his leg over the bike and kicked it into gear, the engine growling beneath him as he sped down the road. The wind whipped through his hair as he leaned into the curves of the highway. His mind kept racing, the pieces of the puzzle still not fitting together. The more he learned, the more questions he had. What was the bloodline really connected to? What was the true power it held? And why was he the one caught in the middle of it all? The ride felt like it went on forever, the landscape blurring past him in a haze of trees and empty highways. He tried to focus on the road, but the weight of the canister in his bag was a constant reminder of what he had to protect. The idea of losing it, of letting someone else take control of it, made his blood run cold. But what if he was already too late? What if they had already found him? The thought gnawed at him as he drove, pushing him to go faster, to get to the next clue, to uncover the truth before it was too late. Hours passed, and as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Jake found himself on a narrow, deserted road leading into the mountains. The terrain had changed. The wide highways were behind him, replaced by winding, uphill paths that seemed to lead into nowhere. He wasn't sure if this was the right place or not, but the map had indicated this was the area where the next piece of the puzzle was hidden. His instincts told him he was close. The air was thinner here, and the silence of the mountains was almost suffocating. He pulled into a small, isolated cabin at the foot of a cliff. The place looked abandoned, but something about it felt different. It was as if it had been waiting for him. Jake parked the bike and approached cautiously. The cabin was quiet, and as he stepped onto the creaky porch, he felt a cold chill wash over him. He reached for the door, his hand trembling slightly, but before he could open it, he heard a sound behind him. A voice, low and measured, cutting through the silence. "You shouldn't have come." Jake's body tensed, his hand instinctively moving to his knife. He turned around slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. The man from the diner stood in the shadows, his face barely visible, but his eyes glinted in the dim light. "I thought I made myself clear," the man said, stepping forward. "This is bigger than you. You've been running from the truth, but it's time to face it." Jake's pulse quickened. He had hoped for a moment of peace, a moment to figure out his next move, but now this man was here, standing between him and the answers he desperately needed. "Who are you?" Jake demanded, his voice rough with frustration. "What do you want from me?" The man didn't answer right away. He simply stepped closer, his presence almost suffocating. "What's inside that canister is the key to everything," he said quietly. "And you're holding it. The ritual has already begun, Jake. You've already triggered it. Now you need to decide if you're going to be a part of it, or if you're going to fight against it." Jake's mind spun. He had no idea what this man was talking about. The ritual, the bloodline. Was it all connected to the canister? And why did he keep saying that it had already begun? "You don't get to decide, Jake," the man continued, his voice low and firm. "You're in it now. You're in the middle of something that was set in motion long before you ever picked up that canister. And they'll stop at nothing to make sure they get it back." The weight of the man's words settled over Jake, cold and heavy. He wasn't prepared for this. He hadn't asked for it, but now there was no escaping it. The choice had already been made for him the moment he had found the canister. The man's eyes flashed, and for the first time, Jake saw something like pity in them. "I don't want to see you make the wrong choice," the man said softly. "But you need to understand that the bloodline is not something you can control. It's too powerful, too dangerous." Jake shook his head, refusing to accept the man's words. "I'm not letting you take it," he said, his voice hardening. "I'll fight for it. I'll fight for the truth." The man's expression hardened. "Then you're already too late," he said. "The ritual cannot be stopped. Not now. Not after everything that has already happened." With that, the man turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving Jake standing alone in front of the cabin. His chest tightened, his mind spinning. He wasn't sure what was about to happen, but one thing was clear: whatever this was, whatever had been set into motion, Jake was now a part of it. And he wasn't going to walk away. Not without a fight. Jake stood frozen for a moment, staring at the shadows where the man had disappeared. The words, "The ritual cannot be stopped. Not now," rang in his ears, a chilling reminder that he was already too deep into something far beyond his control. His instincts screamed at him to walk away, to leave the canister behind and escape whatever trap was being set for him. But that wasn't an option. Not anymore. He had already made his choice when he picked up that canister. Now, there was no turning back. The man had been right about one thing. Jake was in it now. The ritual was real, and it was unfolding before him. But what did it mean? What power had he become involved with? And why had they been so desperate to get their hands on it? The questions weighed heavily on him as he turned toward the cabin. He had to get to the bottom of this, find out what was really going on before it was too late. He couldn't let them control the power hidden inside that canister. He wouldn't let them use it for their own ends. With renewed resolve, Jake made his way to the cabin door, his hand resting on the handle. The air was thick with tension, and every step he took seemed to echo in the silence of the mountains. The man had said there was no escaping it now, that the ritual couldn't be stopped. But Jake wasn't going to let that be his fate. He had to find a way to stop it, to stop them, before it was too late. He stepped inside, the old wood creaking underfoot as the smell of dust and aged books filled his nose. The cabin was just as he remembered it, dimly lit and filled with the weight of years. He moved past the rotting furniture and toward a small, hidden door at the back of the room. He had seen it earlier, but hadn't paid much attention to it. Now it seemed like the only place to go. The door creaked open with a groan, revealing a narrow staircase that descended into darkness. He hesitated for only a second before stepping down into the unknown. The air was colder here, and the sense of foreboding grew stronger with every step. His heart raced as he reached the bottom, and the faint light from a lantern flickered in the distance. Jake wasn't sure what he was expecting to find, but it sure as hell wasn't this. The walls of the underground room were lined with strange symbols, much like the ones on the canister and the scrolls he had found earlier. This was where it all started, the heart of the ritual, the center of the bloodline's power. He felt it then, a surge of energy that seemed to come from the very walls around him. It was like the room itself was alive, and it was waiting for something. Waiting for him. The canister burned in his bag, like it was reacting to the power in the room. He pulled it out, holding it in his hands, and for a moment, everything went silent. The symbols on the walls seemed to pulse, as if recognizing the canister. Jake's breath caught in his throat. This was it. This was the moment when everything would change. Before he could fully process what was happening, a figure appeared from the shadows. It was the man from the diner, but this time, his expression was different, more serious, more knowing. "You shouldn't have come here, Jake," the man said, his voice low. "The ritual isn't something you can control." Jake's jaw clenched, and he took a step forward, holding the canister out in front of him. "I'm not giving it to you," he said, his voice filled with defiance. "Not now, not ever." The man's eyes darkened. "You don't understand. You can't fight this. You can't fight the bloodline." Jake wasn't sure if he believed him, but one thing was clear. He wasn't going to let this man or anyone else take what he had fought so hard to protect. "I don't care who you are, or what you think you know," Jake said, his voice steady. "I'm not going to let you control it. I'm going to stop this ritual, and I'll do whatever it takes." The man didn't respond right away. Instead, he stepped back into the shadows, his form barely visible now. "You don't have a choice," he said quietly, almost as if to himself. "The ritual will happen whether you want it to or not. It's too late to stop it now." Jake's heart pounded in his chest. The man was right about one thing. The ritual was already in motion, and Jake was tied to it. But he didn't have to play their game. He had to find a way to take control. He couldn't let these people, whoever they were, use the power for their own purposes. He clenched his fists, the canister cold in his grip, as the room seemed to vibrate with an energy he couldn't explain. He didn't know how or why, but Jake knew one thing. He wasn't going to let this in the way they wanted it to. He wasn't going to be a pawn in their game. As the figure in the shadows disappeared, Jake's resolve hardened. The ritual might be inevitable, but he was going to make damn sure it didn't play out the way they had planned. He would fight back, no matter the cost. The game was on. Jake's heart pounded as the figure in the shadows disappeared into the darkness of the cabin. The air around him was thick with tension, and every inch of his body was on high alert. The man's words echoed in his mind. The ritual will happen whether you want it to or not. It was clear now that Jake was caught in the middle of something far bigger than he had ever imagined, something he couldn't control. He had hoped that by fighting back, he could stop it, but that hope was quickly fading. The canister in his hand felt colder, its weight pulling him deeper into the web of secrets he had no choice but to unravel. He wasn't sure if he could stop the ritual, but one thing was certain. He wasn't going down without a fight. The cabin felt oppressive, its walls closing in as Jake stood there, trying to make sense of what was happening. The symbols on the walls seemed to shimmer, almost alive, and Jake couldn't help but feel that they were watching him. He had to act quickly. He couldn't afford to waste any more time. The map he had found earlier was still in his pocket, the marks on it still as cryptic as ever. Each symbol, each line, was leading him somewhere. But where? And how was it all connected? He looked around the room, his eyes scanning for any clue that might point him in the right direction. Then, his gaze fell on the old desk in the corner of the room. He hadn't noticed it before, but now it seemed to call to him. He walked over to it, the floor creaking under his boots. The desk was covered in dust, its surface cluttered with papers, books, and strange artifacts. He flipped through the papers, his hands trembling as he searched for something, anything, that might explain what was happening. And then he found it, a small, leather-bound journal tucked beneath a stack of old maps. He opened it slowly, his eyes scanning the pages filled with notes and sketches. The handwriting was shaky, as if the person who had written it was in a hurry, but the words were clear. The journal spoke of the ritual, of the power that had been hidden for centuries, and of the bloodline that had guarded it. It told of a secret society, a group of people who had sworn to protect the canister and the power it held, but who had been hunted down and betrayed by those who wanted to control it. The more Jake read, the more he understood. The bloodline wasn't just about power, it was about control over fate itself. Whoever held the key, whoever unlocked the ritual, could change the future. The canister was the first step, but there was more to it, more pieces to find. Jake's fingers shook as he turned the page, and that's when he saw it. A sketch of the canister, the symbols on it, and a series of markings that seemed to correspond to the ones on the map. This was it, the final clue. The canister wasn't just a key to a ritual. It was a key to a larger puzzle, one that could alter the course of history. Jake had to act now. He couldn't wait any longer. He stuffed the journal into his bag, grabbed the canister, and made his way to the door. But as his hand touched the handle, he heard a sound, a faint whisper, like a voice calling to him from the darkness. He froze, his heart racing. "You can't escape it," the voice said, barely a whisper. "The ritual is already in motion." Jake turned, his hand instinctively reaching for the knife he had tucked into his jacket, but the room was empty. There was no one there. The silence was deafening. The voice had been real, he had heard it. But who had said it? And why? He didn't have time to think about it. He had to leave. The ritual was happening, and if he didn't act now, everything would be lost. He stepped out into the cold night air, the door slamming shut behind him. The world around him felt different, as if the very fabric of reality was shifting. He felt the weight of the canister in his bag, a constant reminder of the power he was now carrying. But it wasn't just the canister. It was the knowledge, the weight of everything he had uncovered. He was in deeper than he had ever imagined. The world was moving around him, and Jake was no longer sure where he stood in it. The sound of footsteps behind him snapped him out of his thoughts. He turned quickly, his hand on the knife, ready to defend himself, but there was no one there. Just the darkness of the night. His instincts were on edge, and his mind was racing. The closer he got to the next location on the map, the more the sense of danger increased. It wasn't just the people who wanted the canister. It was the forces that had been hidden for centuries, waiting to be unleashed. Jake's pulse quickened as he made his way toward his bike. He had no idea what was coming next, but he knew he couldn't do this alone. He needed allies, someone who could help him understand what was at stake. The ritual wasn't just about controlling the canister. It was about controlling the future. And if he was going to survive, he had to find the truth before those who were after him did. As he revved the engine and sped down the road, the weight of the canister in his bag felt heavier than ever. Whatever was coming, Jake wasn't going to let it happen without a fight. Jake's heart raced as the familiar hum of his Harley's engine vibrated through his hands. He sped down the winding roads, the cool night air rushing past him. But the weight of the canister in his bag and the knowledge he carried felt heavier with each passing mile. The more he thought about what the man in the shadows had said, the more the words seemed to sink in. The ritual is already in motion. The idea that he was now part of something that had been happening for centuries made him feel both powerless and driven. The road ahead was long, and he had no idea what would come next, but he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. The people after him, those who wanted the canister, were relentless, and they would stop at nothing to get it. He had to reach the next location on the map, the place that might hold the answers he needed before it was too late. As the night grew darker, Jake's mind swirled with questions. What exactly was the ritual? What did it unlock? The power inside that canister, was it really enough to change everything? He had to know. The map he carried was his only guide now, its cryptic symbols leading him from one dangerous place to the next. His fingers gripped the handlebars tighter as he turned onto a new road, the town he was headed toward just ahead. It was small, too small for the kind of danger that was chasing him, but that was precisely why it was the perfect place to hide in plain sight. His eyes darted around, looking for any signs of movement, but the streets were deserted. There were no lights, no sounds of life, just the eerie quiet that seemed to surround him. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the town. He parked his bike by a dilapidated building and approached on foot, the night growing colder with each step. His senses were on high alert, every shadow, every rustle of leaves sending a chill through him. As he walked down the narrow street, he noticed a small, weathered shop with a faint light coming from the window. He could feel the pull of the place, as if it was calling him. Without thinking, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. The shop was cramped, filled with strange artifacts, old books, and dusty shelves. A woman sat behind the counter, her face partially obscured by the dim light. She looked up as Jake entered, her eyes sharp and calculating. "I've been expecting you," she said in a low voice. Jake froze. "Who are you?" he asked, his hand instinctively going to the canister in his bag. "I know who you are," she replied. "And I know what you found. The canister, the ritual, it's all connected. And if you don't stop it, the consequences will be far worse than you can imagine." Jake felt a surge of unease. "What do you know about it?" he demanded. The woman stood up slowly, her movements deliberate. She walked over to a nearby shelf and pulled down an old book, its pages yellowed with age. She handed it to him, her eyes never leaving his face. "This is what you need," she said. "It's the key to understanding the ritual and stopping it. But you won't be able to do it alone." Jake hesitated, looking at the book in his hands. "Who are you working for?" he asked, his voice low. The woman smiled faintly. "I'm not working for anyone," she said. "I'm here to help you. But it's not going to be easy. The ritual is more powerful than you realize, and there are forces at play that you can't control. If you want to stop it, you have to be ready to sacrifice everything." Jake's grip tightened on the book. He wasn't sure if he could trust her, but the urgency in her voice was undeniable. He had come this far. He had to keep going. "What do I need to do?" he asked, his voice steady. The woman's smile faded, replaced by a look of grim determination. "You need to find the others," she said. "The people who can help you, the ones who know how to stop the ritual. But you're not the only one looking for them. There are others, dangerous people, who will do anything to stop you. They'll stop at nothing to take the canister and use its power for themselves. You have to move fast." Jake nodded, his mind already calculating his next move. "Where do I start?" he asked. The woman paused for a moment, then spoke again. "There's a man in the mountains, someone who's been hiding for years. He knows everything about the bloodline, the ritual, and the canister. He's your best chance at stopping it. But getting to him won't be easy." Jake felt the weight of her words. The road ahead was only getting more dangerous, and the clock was ticking. "I'll find him," he said, his voice hardening with resolve. The woman handed him a map, marking a location deep in the mountains. "Go there," she said. "And be careful. The power you're dealing with is not something you can control. It will either destroy you or change you. There's no middle ground." Jake took the map, slipping it into his pocket as he turned to leave. He wasn't sure if he could trust the woman, but he had no other choice. The fate of the world, and the power locked inside that canister, depended on what he did next. He had come this far, and there was no turning back now. With one last glance at the shop, Jake stepped out into the night, the weight of his mission pressing down on him. The ritual wasn't over yet, and neither was his fight. In this gripping tale of mystery and danger, Jake finds himself at the heart of a centuries-old secret, with the power of the Hell Angels' stories unfolding around him. As he races to uncover the truth behind an ancient ritual, he realizes that he's become an unwilling participant in something far bigger than he could have ever imagined. The Hell Angels. Stories reveal dark conspiracies, ancient bloodlines, and a power that could change the course of history. With the canister in his possession, Jake becomes the key to unlocking a ritual that has been guarded for centuries. As he faces dangerous enemies and uncovers more about the bloodline's power, Jake must decide whether to fight for control or allow the forces of the Hell Angels' stories to claim victory. But the deeper he digs, the more he discovers that the people after him will stop at nothing to get their hands on the canister. With time running out and danger closing in, Jake must gather allies and make choices that will shape the future. As the Hell Angels' stories come to life, Jake's fight for survival becomes a race against time, one where every decision could determine the fate of the world. The ritual, the power, and the bloodline all lead Jake down a path of no return, forcing him to confront not just the forces chasing him, but his own destiny. Will he be able to stop the ritual before it's too late, or will the Hell Angels' stories end with his defeat? Only time will tell as Jake's journey through the dark world of hidden power and ancient secrets unfolds, and the stakes rise higher than ever.